As we drift further into the Greek underworld, imagine stepping into a place where the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth, and shadows cling to every crevice as if reluctant to let go. This is the domain of the rivers, liminal waters that mark thresholds no living foot may cross. The Greeks imagined 5 primary rivers, each carrying its own peculiar burden. Styx, perhaps the most famous, flowed dark and unyielding, a current so potent that gods themselves swore oaths upon its depths, their promises binding beyond all question. Some researchers believe the fearsome power attributed to Styx reflects an ancient human understanding of the deadliness of water, the uncontrollable force that could sweep away life without warning. Next, the Acheron, often called the river of woe, lapped at its banks with a ceaseless, mournful rhythm, carrying the sorrows of those newly dead. Ancient storytellers described it as thick with mist, a place where cries and laments mingled with the rippling surface, creating a soundscape. Oh, of grief! Phlegethon, the river of fire, ran not with water but with molten fury, a terrifying vision of punishment. Yet some suggest it may symbolize the destructive power of guilt and unresolved deeds. Cocytus, the river of lamentation, was frozen in some accounts, its icy grip binding the most sorrowful souls in endless reflection, a frozen mirror of despair. And then there was Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters could erase memory entirely, offering both mercy and terror, the chance to forget past lives or the knowledge that defines identity. The ferryman Charon, the spectral guide with his tattered cloak and hollow eyes, navigated these rivers in silence, his skiff always ready for the next arrival. To board, the dead needed a coin, a simple obol placed upon the lips in the living world, a ritual that ensured passage but also reminded the bereaved of the fragile boundary between worlds. Some scholars believe Charon is more than a myth. He embodies the human need to ritualize transition, to provide structure to a process as inevitable as nightfall. Others see him as a cautionary figure, a reminder that without preparation, the journey ends not in rest, but in wandering, lost. Along the water's edge, the rivers themselves were not mere backdrops. They were active participants in the fate of souls, their currents shaping journeys, deciding destinations, and testing the dead's readiness for what lay beyond. Yet, even as we trace the paths of Styx and Lethe, one question lingers. What secrets do these waters hide, currents unseen and unheard, carrying whispers that even the gods might fear to follow? Once a soul reached the edge of the underworld rivers, the journey paused in a place of waiting, a dim shoreline where time felt stretched. Thin and sound seemed swallowed by the fog. Here stood Charon, the ferryman of the dead, neither god nor mortal, but something older and more tired than both. Ancient descriptions paint him as gaunt and severe, his eyes burning faintly beneath a hood darkened by centuries of crossings. The wood of his boat was said to be rough and splintered, creaking with every movement, as if it remembered every soul it had ever carried. Some researchers believe Charon emerged from early funerary customs designed to give structure to death, while others suggest he represents the psychological need for an intermediary, a figure who makes the impossible transition feel governed rather than chaotic. The price he demanded was small, just a single coin, yet its meaning was immense. The obol placed in the mouth of the dead was not payment in a material sense, but proof of remembrance, evidence that someone in the living world had acknowledged the passing. Souls without the coin were condemned to wander the riverbanks, listening to the soft splash of oars they would never board, a punishment rooted not in cruelty, but neglect. This belief reinforced the importance of burial rites, turning remembrance into a moral obligation rather than an emotional choice. As Charon's boat pushed off from the shore, the water closed behind it without ripples, sealing the passage completely. The crossing was described as silent, broken only by the slow dip of the oar and the faint murmur of other souls, each realizing that the world above was now unreachable. The farther the boat moved from land, the more memories seemed to blur, as if the river itself was already preparing the dead for what lay ahead. Some traditions claim that even during this crossing, souls were judged in subtle ways, their demeanor, fear, or acceptance silently noted. Others suggest the crossing itself was the first test, separating those who resisted death from those who surrendered to it. Charon never spoke, never comforted, never condemned. His role was not mercy or justice, but transition, the cold professionalism of inevitability. Yet the Greeks believed that even this grim ferryman could be influenced, bribed by heroes or softened by divine command, suggesting that the boundary between life and death, though firm, was not entirely absolute. And if the ferryman could be persuaded, then what other rules of the underworld might bend under the right pressure, waiting to be tested by those bold enough to try? Beyond the rivers and the ferryman's silent crossing, the soul entered a space that felt neither alive nor dead, a vast threshold where shadows gathered with uneasy purpose. This was the realm of judgment, where the Greeks imagined that every life, no matter how small or forgotten, was weighed and examined. The air here was still, heavy with expectation, and the ground beneath felt smooth and cold, like polished stone worn down by countless footsteps. Some researchers believe the concept of judgment evolved gradually, reflecting a shift in Greek thought from communal fate to individual moral responsibility. Earlier traditions suggested that all souls shared the same dim existence. But as ideas about justice matured, the underworld began to mirror the ethical concerns of the living world above. At the center of this process stood the judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iolcus, once mortal kings renowned for their fairness in life. Their elevation to judges reinforced a powerful idea that how one ruled or lived among the living determined one's authority among the dead. Each judge served a role. Iolcus, keeper of the keys, examined those from Europe, his gaze said to pierce through reputation and see only truth. Rhadamanthus judged the souls of Asia, stern and uncompromising, ensuring that no lie survived the crossing. Minos, holding the final authority, listened in silence before delivering irrevocable decisions. Their judgments were not theatrical or emotional. They were precise, final, and absolute. There were no appeals, no negotiations, no second chances. Some traditions suggest that souls spoke in their own defense, while others claimed the judges already knew everything, reading lives as one reads a finished text. The verdict determined the path forward. The Asphodel Meadows for the ordinary, Tartarus for the monstrous, or Elysium for the exceptional. This system introduced a new terror and a new hope into Greek culture. Death was no longer just an end, but a reckoning. Actions once hidden, excuses once accepted, now carried weight beyond the grave. Yet the process was not purely punitive. It offered meaning, a reassurance that the universe noticed moral effort even when society failed to do so. Still, uncertainty lingered. What standards were applied? Were they human laws, divine principles, or something older and more abstract? Some philosophers argued that the judges reflected evolving human conscience, while others believed they enforced eternal cosmic laws. Standing before them, the soul faced the ultimate question: had one lived in alignment with order or in defiance of it? And as the judges raised their eyes and pointed toward a chosen path, another mystery emerged: what truly awaited beyond that decision, and was any destination ever truly permanent? Once judgment was passed, most souls were not cast into fire or crowned with glory, but guided instead toward a place of quiet endurance known as the Asphodel Meadows. This vast, pale expanse stretched endlessly in every direction, neither cruel nor kind, illuminated by a dim, colorless light that never changed with time. The ground was soft and gray, covered with asphodel flowers whose faint scent carried a subtle bitterness, and the air felt thin, as though sound itself had learnt to speak in whispers. Ancient sources describe this realm as the destination of ordinary souls, those who lived without great virtue or great crime, people whose lives passed in modest rhythms of work, family, and survival. Some researchers believe the Asphodel Meadows reflect an early Greek acceptance of mediocrity as the human norm, a recognition that most lives do not burn brightly enough to earn eternal reward or punishment. Here, souls wandered slowly, recalling fragments of their former existence without the sharp pain of regret or the joy of triumph. Memory lingered, but it dulled over time, fading like a dream upon waking. Others suggest that the meadows served as a psychological continuation of life itself, stripped of ambition and consequence, where existence persisted without purpose or progress. There were no seasons, no hunger, no urgency. Conversations drifted and dissolved. Faces felt familiar, but names slipped away. This quiet monotony was not torment, yet it carried a subtle sadness, more unsettling than pain. Some myths hint that heroes like Achilles found this fate unbearable, preferring a short life of glory to an eternity of forgettable peace. The Asphodel Meadows remind us that in Greek thought, the greatest fear was not suffering, but insignificance. To exist forever without meaning, without growth, without recognition, was its own kind of shadow. Yet there is debate. Some traditions suggest that souls could move on from the meadows, that memory might eventually dissolve enough to allow rebirth, or that certain rituals performed by the living could alter a soul's condition even after death. Mystery cults later promised escape from this grey fate, offering initiates the hope of something brighter beyond the ordinary path. As the souls drifted through fields of pale flowers, the underworld seemed to ask a quiet question rather than deliver a verdict. Is a life without great wrong also a life without lasting reward? And if this was the destiny awaiting most of humanity, what lay beyond the meadows for those who dared to live differently? Far beneath the Asphodel Meadows, deeper even than the realm of Hades itself, lay Tartarus, a place the ancient Greeks described not merely as a location, but as a force of cosmic containment. This was the abyss where the most dangerous beings were confined, a pit so deep that an anvil, dropped from the world above, would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before reaching its bottom. The air here was heavy and oppressive, thick with heat, iron, and the echo of distant cries that never fully reached the surface. Some researchers believe Tartarus originated as a mythological solution to a terrifying question. Where do you place beings too powerful, too destructive, to exist anywhere else? In early mythology, Tartarus imprisoned the Titans after their defeat by Zeus, sealing away primordial chaos beneath layers of divine order. Later traditions expanded its role, transforming it into a prison for mortals whose crimes violated the deepest laws of existence. Unlike the quiet drifting of the Asphodel Meadows, Tartarus was defined by motion and resistance. Chains groaned, flames hissed, and the ground itself seemed to recoil from those condemned to walk upon it. Punishment here was not random, it was precise, symbolic, and eternal. Each torment reflected the nature of the crime committed in life. Sisyphus endlessly pushed his stone uphill only to watch it roll back down, mirroring his lifelong defiance of death and deceit of the gods. Tantalus stood surrounded by water and fruit he could never reach, condemned to eternal hunger and thirst for his betrayal of divine trust. Ixion was bound to a spinning wheel of fire, punished for attempting to violate sacred hospitality. These stories were not just warnings but moral diagrams, showing listeners how actions created consequences that echoed forever. Yet even Tartarus carried ambiguity. Some myths suggest that punishment could soften over immense spans of time, or that cosmic cycles might one day end all suffering. Others insist Tartarus was absolute, the final boundary beyond which no redemption existed. The uncertainty itself amplified its terror. To be cast into Tartarus was to become an example, a living reminder etched into the structure of the universe. As flames flickered against black stone and the condemned replayed their crimes endlessly, a question hovered in the darkness. Was Tartarus a place of justice, or a mirror reflecting humanity's fear of chaos left uncontained? And if such depths existed below, what heights might rise above for those who lived in harmony with the cosmic order? In quiet contrast to the depths of Tartarus, there existed a realm spoken of in softer tones, a place of light and release known as Elysium. This was not a reward promised to all, but a destination reserved for those whose lives had aligned with divine favor, heroic excellence, or extraordinary virtue. Ancient poets described Elysium as bathed in a gentle radiance, where the air was warm without heat, and a perpetual breeze carried the scent of blooming fields and distant seas. Unlike the shadowed stillness of the Asphodel Meadows, Elysium pulsed with subtle vitality. Grass shimmered as if brushed by sunlight, rivers ran clear and calm, and laughter echoed faintly in the distance, not loud or overwhelming, but reassuring. Some researchers believe Elysium evolved from early Indo-European concepts of a blissful afterlife, later shaped by Greek ideals of honor and achievement. Others suggest it reflects a cultural longing for escape from suffering, a place where the weight of mortal struggle finally dissolved. In Elysium, souls retained memory, identity, and purpose. Heroes trained, philosophers debated, and poets sang, continuing the pursuits that defined them in life, but without fear of failure or loss. In some accounts, the righteous could be reborn, living multiple perfected lives before achieving complete release, a concept that hints at early philosophical ideas about the soul's journey toward purification. Yet even Elysium was not free from complexity. Access was inconsistent across myths. Some traditions allowed only the children of gods to enter, while others opened its gates to those judged just or initiated into sacred mysteries. This inconsistency reveals an evolving moral framework, one struggling to reconcile inherited status with earned virtue. The beauty of Elysium also carried an unsettling undertone. If only a few could reach such peace, what did that say about the nature of human existence? Was bliss meant to be rare, or had humanity simply failed to live in alignment with the cosmic order? As golden fields stretched endlessly and the suffering of the mortal world faded into distant memory, Elysium seemed to whisper a promise rather than declare a certainty. And yet, even here, one question lingered beneath the calm surface. If perfection could be presiding over every river, field, and abyss of the underworld was Hades himself, a god often misunderstood as a figure of cruelty when, in truth, he embodied inevitability and order. Unlike Zeus with his thunder or Poseidon with his raging seas, Hades ruled quietly, his power felt rather than seen. The Greeks rarely spoke his name aloud, referring to him instead as the unseen, believing that attention invited misfortune. His realm was not one of torment by default, but of balance, a structured system ensuring that every soul reached its proper place. Ancient descriptions depict Hades as stern and solemn, seated upon a dark throne of obsidian, his presence heavy like the earth pressing down above the dead. Some researchers believe this portrayal reflects humanity's early attempts to personify death as something neutral rather than malicious, a force that follows rules instead of whims. Hades did not judge souls, nor did he decide their punishments or rewards. He enforced the outcomes determined by older laws, making him less a tyrant and more a custodian. His helm of invisibility symbolized the hidden nature of death, unseen yet ever present, moving through the world without warning. By his side often sat Persephone, whose seasonal descent and return shaped the rhythms of life above, binding the underworld directly to the cycles of growth and decay. Their union was complex, sometimes described as forced, other times as balanced, reflecting shifting cultural views on marriage, power, and renewal. Within Hades' domain, nothing escaped order. Even the most chaotic regions, like Tartarus, existed within a defined structure. This emphasis on balance suggests that the Greeks viewed death not as chaos, but as a necessary counterweight to life. Yet Hades was not emotionless. Some myths depict him showing mercy, allowing heroes like Orpheus and Heracles to bend the rules, though never without cost. These rare exceptions reinforced the idea that the underworld was governed, but not entirely rigid, capable of acknowledging extraordinary circumstances. Still, Hades never lost control. Every borrowed soul was returned. Every disruption was corrected. In this way, he represented a cosmic truth, both comforting and unsettling. Death could be negotiated with, but never defeated. As the Lord of the Unseen watched over his silent kingdom, one mystery remained unresolved. Even gods obeyed the laws of the underworld. Then where did those laws come from? And what ancient force wrote the rules that bound both mortal and divine alike? At the heart of the Greek underworld's deepest symbolism stands Persephone, a figure whose story bridges life and death, light and shadow. Her descent into the realm below was not just a myth of abduction or marriage, but an explanation of the world's rhythms, a narrative designed to make sense of loss and return. Ancient poets describe Persephone as a goddess of spring, her presence above the earth causing flowers to bloom and crops to rise. When she vanished, taken into the underworld by Hades, the world above withered in grief, mirroring her mother Demeter's despair. Some researchers believe this myth emerged from early agricultural societies trying to understand seasonal cycles. translating the death of crops in winter into a story of divine absence. Others suggest Persephone represents the human soul itself, drawn inevitably toward death, yet never fully severed from life. In the underworld, Persephone became queen, seated beside Hades, her role evolving from captive to ruler. This transformation is crucial, suggesting that descent does not always mean loss of power, but a shift in identity. Her consumption of the pomegranate seed sealed her bond to the underworld, a small, irreversible act with enormous consequences. Each seed symbolized time, commitment, and the permanence of choice. Yet the compromise that followed allowed her to return to the surface for part of each year, restoring balance between worlds. This cyclical movement softened the terror of death, reframing it as a passage rather than an ending. Persephone's presence also altered the underworld itself. As queen, she became an intermediary, more compassionate than Hades, more approachable to lost souls. Some traditions depict her granting mercy or guidance, especially to women, positioning her as a figure of empathy within an otherwise rigid system. The Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a better fate after death, though their exact teachings remain unknown. This secrecy suggests that Persephone's story carried knowledge considered too powerful for the uninitiated. As she moved between worlds, she embodied a truth both comforting and unsettling. Life and death are not opposites, but phases of the same eternal cycle. And as her footsteps echoed up from the underworld toward the light, a quiet question followed: what is truly lost when something descends into darkness? And what returns changed, carrying the imprint of what lies below? Among all who dared to cross into the Greek underworld while still breathing, none did so with a weapon sharper than sound. Orpheus, the legendary musician, descended not through strength or divine command, but through song. His lyre, said to be crafted by Apollo himself, carried melodies so profound that stones leaned closer to listen and trees uprooted themselves to follow. When Orpheus entered the realm of the dead, the usual silence shifted. The rivers slowed. The shadows stilled. Even the endless punishments of Tartarus are said to have paused, if only for a moment. Some researchers believe the myth of Orpheus reflects ancient beliefs in the spiritual power of music. The idea that harmony could influence not just emotion, but reality itself. Others see Orpheus as a symbol of human creativity confronting mortality, using art to negotiate with the inevitable. His purpose was simple and devastating: to retrieve Eurydice, his wife, lost to a sudden death before their life together had truly begun. Before Hades and Persephone, Orpheus played, weaving grief and love into a sound so raw that even the rulers of the underworld were moved. The conditions placed upon him were precise and cruel in their simplicity. He could lead Eurydice back to the living world, but only if he did not look back until they both reached the surface. This rule transformed hope into a test of trust. As Orpheus walked upward through darkness, every step echoed with doubt. The silence behind him became unbearable. Some traditions say he feared the gods were deceiving him. Others suggest he feared Eurydice might no longer be there at all. In that final moment, just before the exit, he turned. Eurydice vanished, her second death sealed not by fate, but by human uncertainty. This story haunted Greek culture because it offered no villain, only a tragic flaw deeply familiar to all. Love was powerful enough to move death, but not powerful enough to overcome fear. Orpheus' failure reinforced the unbreakable rule of the underworld. Exceptions may be granted, but they come with impossible conditions. As his music faded and the gates closed once more, the myth left behind a lingering question if art can open the doors of death. Why can it not keep them open long enough for hope to pass through? While Orpheus descended into the underworld with music, Heracles entered carrying the weight of brute strength and unyielding resolve. His journey below was not driven by love or grief, but by obligation. One final labor imposed upon him as punishment and purification. Tasked with capturing Cerberus, the monstrous guardian of the underworld, Heracles was required to face death directly and return without weapons. Ancient storytellers describe his descent as a rupture in the natural order, a living man stepping where only souls should tread. Some researchers believe this myth represents humanity's fascination with confronting mortality head-on, testing whether strength alone could overcome the ultimate boundary. Others suggest it reflects the cultural ideal of endurance, the belief that suffering, if borne fully, could lead to redemption. Cerberus, with his 3 snarling heads, serpent tail, and mane of writhing snakes, embodied the fear of return, a creature designed not to attack the living, but to prevent escape. The battle between Heracles and Cerberus was not a clash of weapons, but of will. Gripping the beast in his arms, Heracles endured venomous bites and crushing strength, subduing the guardian through sheer persistence. This struggle symbolized more than physical power. It was a test of whether a mortal could face death without denying it. Hades permitted the act under strict conditions, reinforcing once again that the underworld operated by rules rather than impulse. When Heracles emerged into the light with Cerberus in tow, the living recoiled in terror, confronted by a piece of death dragged into their world. Yet the beast was returned, and balance restored. Heracles gained no escape from mortality, no exemption from death itself. Instead, he gained understanding, having crossed the boundary and returned marked by the experience. Unlike Orpheus, Heracles succeeded, but his success was temporary and symbolic. He did not steal a soul or disrupt fate. He proved only that the boundary could be touched, not broken. This distinction mattered deeply in Greek thought. Death could be faced, negotiated, even endured, but never conquered. As Heracles completed his final labor and the gates of the underworld closed behind him, a quiet realization settled in. If even the strongest of mortals could only borrow from death, not defeat it, what hope or warning did that leave for all others who would one day follow the same downward path? At the gates of the Greek underworld stood Cerberus, a creature less a monster of chaos and more a living lock forged from fear and obedience, with 3 heads snarling in constant vigilance and a serpent for a tail. Cerberus did not symbolize aggression toward the living, but the impossibility of return once death had been entered. Ancient descriptions emphasize his role as guardian rather than executioner, a being whose presence alone discouraged escape. Some researchers believe Cerberus evolved from early Indo-European watchdog myths, creatures placed at the boundaries between worlds to protect sacred or forbidden spaces. Others suggest he represents the psychological barrier of death itself, the internal realization that crossing a certain line means there is no turning back. Cerberus allowed souls to enter freely, greeting them with snarls and snapping jaws. But it was those who attempted to leave who faced his full fury. This one-way vigilance reinforced a fundamental law of the underworld. Death is a transition, not a corridor. Stories of heroes encountering Cerberus often emphasize cleverness or divine permission rather than brute force. Orpheus lulled him with music, Heracles subdued him by strength, and in some accounts, Hermes guided souls past him without resistance. These variations highlight an important idea. Different approaches were required to face death, depending on one's nature and purpose. Cerberus' multiple heads are often interpreted as symbols of past, present, and future, all watching simultaneously, or as manifestations of hunger, rage, and fear, the emotions tied most closely to mortality. His constant presence at the gate made the boundary tangible, transforming an abstract concept into something with teeth, breath, and sound. The growl of Cerberus was said to echo through the tunnels of the underworld, a reminder to wandering souls that certain paths were closed forever. Yet Cerberus himself was bound by rules. He did not roam freely, nor did he choose whom to attack. He served eternally, without malice or mercy. In this way, Cerberus mirrored Hades, a force of enforcement rather than judgment. As souls passed beneath his gaze, some trembling, some resigned, a question lingered in the darkness. If even the guardian of death was only a servant, then what greater law commanded both gods and monsters alike to stand watch over the final threshold? Beyond the iron gates and the watchful eyes of Cerberus, the first true barrier to the underworld's inner realms appeared, the River Styx, a ribbon of black water, silent yet alive with the memories of countless souls. Its surface, glassy and unnervingly still, reflected no light of sun or moon, only the faint shimmer of otherworldly currents beneath. Some researchers suggest that the Styx was imagined as a natural boundary, a liminal space where the living could no longer tread and the dead were separated from the world they once knew. Others interpret it symbolically as the river of oath and inevitability, a waterway that exacted both fear and reverence. The ferryman, Charon, awaited with his flat-bottomed boat, or, slicing silently through the inky waters, a figure both ordinary and terrifying in his stoic insistence. Coins placed in the mouths of the dead were said to pay his toll, a ritual that ensured safe passage across. Though stories persist of those who had nothing to offer being left to wander the riverbanks for eternity. Unable to cross, their voices carried as whispers over the waters. The Styx was more than a river. It was a mirror of mortality itself. Its depths, cold and unyielding, seemed to drink the essence of life, leaving only the hushed echoes of memory and regret. Some accounts describe the Styx as looping endlessly, an eternal boundary that circled the underworld like a serpent, reinforcing the permanence of death. The sound of cairns or on the water, the faint lapping against unseen shores, and the whisper of souls in the mist created an atmosphere that was simultaneously calm and ominous, a place where time held no meaning. Philosophers later interpreted the Styx as a metaphor for moral passage, a space where one's choices in life were silently observed before any judgment could be delivered. The crossing itself demanded more than payment. It demanded acceptance, the relinquishing of life's attachments, and a quiet surrender to the unknown. In every story, the journey across the Styx hinted at more than a physical transition. It represented the threshold of fate, the moment when one faced the finality of existence and the uncertain landscapes that lay beyond. And as the souls stepped onto the opposite shore, leaving the dark waters behind, a lingering question hovered in the air. What awaited them further in the shadows, where judgment, punishment, and reward were dispensed? And how would the choices of their lives shape the eternity that stretched endlessly before them? Once the souls had crossed the black waters of the Styx, they entered the realm of the underworld's judges, figures both terrifying and inscrutable, whose eyes seemed to pierce not just flesh, but the very essence of a life once lived. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iolcus presided over the post-mortem tribunal, each carrying authority over different regions and types of souls, their decisions irrevocable and absolute. Some scholars believe these judges were imagined as extensions of societal and divine justice, translating human notions of right and wrong into a cosmic scale. Others suggest they embodied the moral anxieties of Greek society, a way to externalize guilt, responsibility, and the consequences of actions too complex to escape even in death. The atmosphere in their halls was heavy, filled with an almost tactile tension. The air seemed to press against the chest, while whispers of countless evaluations brushed like cold wind across the senses. No pleading, no display of wealth or power could sway their judgment. Each soul faced the mirror of its own deeds, weighed against unseen scales that measured virtue, vice, and intent. Classical narratives describe chambers with endless corridors, dark alcoves, and glowing thresholds, each leading to regions of reward or punishment. Those deemed righteous might wander into the Elysian fields, where the scent of perpetual spring mingled with the soft hum of joyous souls. Yet even this paradise carried a quiet vigilance, a sense that virtue was eternal, but not untested. The condemned, by contrast, faced regions of torment, where Tantalus suffered eternal hunger and thirst, Sisyphus pushed his boulder endlessly, and the souls of betrayers endured punishments perfectly suited to their crimes. The geography of the underworld reflected moral order, where landscape and punishment intertwined, teaching lessons to both the living and the dead. Some researchers see these depictions as early explorations of ethical philosophy, dramatizing the consequences of moral failings in ways that extended beyond myth into societal reflection. Others suggest the judges themselves, seated in their shadowed halls, were archetypal symbols of fate and inevitability, embodiments of the inescapable laws that govern life and death. As each soul passed through the judgment, the silence of the underworld deepened, only broken by the faint, haunting echoes of remorse, triumph, or resignation. And in that silence, one lingering question remained, as enduring as the obsidian shadows themselves, when faced with absolute truth, stripped of pretense and illusion. How would a soul's choices measure against the unforgiving eyes of eternity? Beyond the judgments of Minos, Rhadamanthus and Iolcus lay the deepest, most forbidding regions of the underworld, a chasm so vast that some ancient poets claimed it was as far beneath the earth as the heavens were above it. A place where shadows stretched like molten metal and the air itself seemed thick with despair. Tartarus was reserved for the worst offenders, the cosmic criminals, those whose transgressions disrupted the natural and divine order alike. Titans, traitors, murderers, and the most impious of mortals were cast into this abyss, chained to eternal torment in a landscape of jagged cliffs, smouldering fires, and unending darkness. Some researchers interpret Tartarus as a projection of Greek societal fears, a dramatization of ultimate retribution where lawlessness and hubris could never escape consequences. Others suggest it reflected the philosophical notion that evil, when left unchecked, demanded a space as extreme as its own moral gravity. Within this abyss, punishment was intricately tailored. Tityus stretched across 9 acres, eternally pursued by vultures, while Ixion spun endlessly upon a fiery wheel, each torment a mirror of the crime, each punishment a lesson both for the dead and the living who might hear these stories. The sensory experience of Tartarus is almost palpable in the classical texts, the heat that stings the skin, the oppressive weight of despair, the eerie silence interrupted only by the moans of the condemned. Rivers of molten rock and sulphurous fumes cut across blackened plains, creating corridors that seemed to breathe, pulsate, and close in upon intruders. The boundaries between geography and moral order blurred, making Tartarus both a prison and a pedagogy, a cosmic reflection of guilt, vengeance, and inevitability. Some scholars see in Tartarus the earliest form of a moralized cosmology, where geography itself communicated ethical principles, while others suggest it served a more psychological function, giving form to fear and conscience. Yet for all its terror, Tartarus was not mindless cruelty. It was a place where justice was absolute, impartial, and unyielding, where even the mighty could not escape the consequences of pride, betrayal, or defiance of the gods. And as the stories whisper of this bottomless abyss, one cannot help but wonder if even the most monstrous souls are confined, measured, and punished. Then, what does this tell the living about the invisible scales of destiny and the dark? Uncharted territories of their own choices. While Tartarus loomed as a realm of punishment, the Greeks imagined another extreme, a land of light and serenity where souls of exceptional virtue and favor could wander in peace the Elysian fields, sometimes called the Islands of the Blessed. These verdant plains, bathed in perpetual sunlight and gentle breezes, were described as vast meadows of soft grass, blooming flowers, and crystal-clear streams, where the air carried the sweet scent of ambrosia and the songs of unseen birds. Some poets depict rolling hills that stretch to the horizon, shaded by olive trees and populated by heroes of old, those who had pleased the gods or achieved extraordinary deeds. Others suggest the Elysian fields were a reflection of human longing for rest, a psychological projection of reward after suffering, where the soul could savor a life free from toil, worry, or sorrow. The atmosphere here was one of almost sacred tranquility, a place where music and laughter mingled with the gentle murmur of waters, and where time itself seemed softened, bending to the eternal calm. Some researchers believe that the Greek conception of Elysium mirrors a form of ethical idealism, an allegorical landscape that reinforced societal values of honor, courage, and virtue, while others argue it evolved from early mystery religious practices promising blessedness and spiritual initiation. In some accounts, Elysium was not merely a final resting place, but a site of continued existence and even preparation for reincarnation, where souls could learn, grow, and eventually return to the mortal world with knowledge and wisdom. A notion that intertwined morality, education, and the cosmic order. The presence of familiar heroes and legendary figures in these fields provided a vivid narrative for ancient audiences, illustrating the tangible rewards of bravery, piety, and righteousness. The sensory richness of Elysium, from the softness of the meadows underfoot to the warmth of the eternal sun on the skin, creates a profound contrast with the shadowed torments of Tartarus, reinforcing the moral dichotomy that underpinned Greek underworld beliefs. Yet, despite its beauty and promise, the Elysian fields carried their own mysteries. Who, exactly, was deemed worthy, and what secrets did the gods reserve for those fortunate enough to dwell here? The boundaries between mortal achievement, divine favor, and cosmic destiny remained enigmatic, leaving listeners to ponder whether the serenity of Elysium was accessible through deeds, alone or guided by forces beyond human understanding. And as one imagines wandering those endless, sunlit meadows, the question lingers: is virtue truly rewarded, or does the soul's journey hold deeper, hidden trials yet unseen? Beyond the realms of punishment and reward, The Greek underworld was threaded with rivers whose waters carried more than mere currents. They flowed with symbolism, memory, and the inescapable weight of fate. Styx, the most feared and sacred of these rivers, ran like a dark, viscous vein through the underworld, its surface shimmering with a spectral sheen that seemed to swallow light. It was said that even the gods swore oaths upon Styx, binding themselves to promises with terrifying consequences should they falter. The river embodying the absolute, unyielding nature of truth and divine law. Adjacent flowed Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters whispered promises of oblivion, allowing souls to shed the burdens of their past lives, to drift into new existences untroubled by former mistakes, regrets, or sins. Some scholars interpret Lethe as a metaphor for the human desire to escape memory and guilt, a liquid bomb for the psyche, while others suggest it represents the necessary erasure that enables cosmic cycles of death and rebirth to function without interruption. Phlegethon, a river of fire, snaked with molten fury through the underworld's chasms, consuming the unworthy in flames, its crackling roar echoing through caverns of despair. A vivid testament to the intensity of divine retribution. Cocytus, the river of wailing, pooled the tears and lamentations of the sorrowful dead, its waters icy and mournful, carrying the cries of countless souls whose fates were sealed by misfortune or moral failure. Acheron, often called the river of pain, marked the threshold of the underworld for many, a liminal zone that souls had to cross, sometimes guided by Charon's ferrymen in exchange for the obolus placed upon their lips at death. Each river, in its distinct essence, conveyed moral and psychological dimensions, reminding the living and the dead alike of the consequences of choices, the passage of time, and the inescapability of destiny. The rivers were not static. Some accounts suggest their courses shifted with cosmic rhythms, rising and falling in correspondence with human deeds or divine will. Their presence, both literal and allegorical, a network of currents connecting punishment, purification, and transcendence. To journey along these rivers was to confront the full spectrum of human experience, fear, regret, hope, and the silent yearning for redemption. And yet, as one imagines the cold rush of Acheron or the fiery spray of Phlegethon, a question surfaces in the mind. Are these rivers merely metaphors of conscience, or do they carry the literal weight of souls, flowing inexorably toward destinies we can only begin to fathom? As we delve deeper into the labyrinthine passages of the Greek underworld, one cannot ignore the formidable guardians who patrol its borders, creatures of both terror and solemn duty, whose presence ensures that the boundaries between the living and the dead remain inviolate. Chief among these sentinels is Cerberus, the colossal three-headed hound whose breath reeks of decay and whose growls reverberate through the shadowed corridors, a creature whose very gaze is said to petrify the faint of heart. Each head of Cerberus represents vigilance over past, present, and future sins, a constant reminder that no misdeed escapes the notice of the underworld. Some interpretations suggest that Cerberus is less a malevolent force than a necessary instrument of cosmic order, a living symbol of the barriers that separate mortality from eternity, obedience from transgression. Beyond Cerberus, the underworld is populated by lesser spirits, spectral wardens, and enigmatic figures, each assigned to specific regions or tasks collecting the newly arrived, recording deeds, or guiding souls along prescribed paths. Charon, the ferryman, embodies both practical function and symbolic weight, silently awaiting the payment of an obelisk to fairy souls across the dark waters of Acheron, his skeletal form draped in shadow, or dipping into the black river with methodical precision. Some scholars speculate that Charon represents the inevitable passage of time, the crossing that cannot be delayed or denied, while others view him as a mediator, a figure of negotiation between mortality and the realm beyond. In the recesses of the underworld, guardians like the Furies relentlessly pursue those guilty of familial bloodshed or moral transgression, their serpentine hair hissing, eyes aflame with unyielding judgment, embodying vengeance and the inescapable consequences of sin. Even the dead themselves, once they arrive, may serve as custodian shades who maintain order, guide newcomers, or bear warnings to the living through oracular or prophetic means. The guardians are never static. Their forms shift with the narratives, sometimes appearing as human, sometimes as monstrous, always carrying the weight of moral and metaphysical significance. In walking these corridors, one feels the immense gravity of thresholds, the chilling awareness that every step carries potential judgment, and every hesitation might invite scrutiny. And yet, as these figures of terror and authority loom, one must wonder, do they enforce divine justice impartially? Or do they reflect the anxieties and fears of those who created them? Eternal mirrors of human conscience, forever watching, forever waiting, guarding secrets that may never be fully known. Flowing through the vast expanse of the Greek underworld are rivers that carry more than water. They carry meaning, memory, and the inexorable currents of fate. Each river is a boundary, a test, and a passage, winding through shadowed landscapes and mist-laden plains where echoes of the living world fade into whispers. The Acheron, often described as the river of woe, stretches like a vein of darkness, its surface shimmering with the reflections of sorrowful souls. Each ripple a story of longing, regret, or unfinished duty. Souls approach its banks hesitantly, the chill of the water reaching into the marrow. And there waits Charon, the silent ferryman, whose skeletal hand reaches for the obelisk, a coin that represents both passage and the weight of earthly preparation. Next is the Styx, the river of hatred, a liquid boundary that embodies divine oath and cosmic order, where the gods themselves swear binding promises, and even the most powerful mortals tread carefully. Its waters are said to possess the power to make inviolable vows, yet also to poison the proud or impure. A liquid mirror reflecting the consequences of choices made in life. Cocytus, the river of lamentation, is thick with mournful cries, the air around it heavy with the dirges of unfulfilled desires and broken destinies. And some scholars believe that to hear its currents is to glimpse the profound human fear of finality. Phlegethon, a river of fire, courses with heat and menace, often reserved for those whose lives were marked by violence or betrayal. Its fiery waves, a dramatic testament to punishment and purification intertwined, an element of the underworld where classical ideas of justice take on both tangible and terrifying form. Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, carries the most haunting promise that souls who drink from its waters may shed the memories of their mortal existence, their triumphs and tragedies dissolving into oblivion, a soft erasure that allows reincarnation or a gentle release from the burdens of earthly life. Some interpretations suggest Lethe symbolizes psychological necessity, the human need to let go, to reconcile with impermanence, while others see it as a profound warning about the loss of identity in the face of eternity. These rivers are not mere barriers. They are active agents in the unfolding of the underworld's moral and cosmic drama, shaping the journey of every soul that arrives at their banks. And as their waters wind endlessly through shadowed valleys and obsidian cliffs, one is left to wonder, do these currents guide the dead toward destiny? Or do they flow according to rules that even the gods themselves cannot fully command? A reminder that, in the realm beyond life, certainty is as elusive as the mists above the water. As we linger at the edges of the Greek underworld, its shadowed contours still clinging to our imagination, it becomes clear that this realm of shades and judgment was never merely a final destination. It was a lens through which the living understood life itself, its fragility, its choices, and its ultimate significance. From the earliest geometric pottery depicting mourners with stiff arms raised in ritual lament, to the intricate red figure vases that told stories of heroes, gods, and moral reckoning, the Greek imagination wove the underworld into the very fabric of cultural consciousness. Each artistic depiction, each myth recounted around flickering hearths, carried lessons and warnings, whispers of divine justice, and the subtle reflection of human fears. As philosophers pondered the soul's destiny, as poets dramatized journeys into the realms of the dead, and as mystery cults promised insight into post-mortem existence, the underworld became more than myth. It became a psychological and spiritual scaffold, a shared narrative through which society negotiated mortality, virtue, and the unknowable. This framework did not vanish with the passing of Greek civilization. Roman authors absorbed, adapted, and transformed it, embedding it within the epic sweep of Virgil's Aeneid, giving new form to rivers, fields, and torches, layering Roman political and ethical anxieties atop Greek mythic architecture. And later, in the hands of early Christian thinkers, these narratives were neither discarded nor accepted. They were reinterpreted, reshaped to align with monotheistic theology, creating allegories of hell, purgatory, and salvation that would resonate for centuries. Dante Alighieri, standing on the shoulders of these classical and Christian traditions, charted a journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise that fused moral philosophy, theological reflection, and literary imagination, mapping the underworld as a complex moral universe, one that guided the living as much as it depicted the dead. Even beyond literature, the underworld's influence permeates visual art. From Renaissance frescoes to modern cinema, its rivers, guardians, and shadowed landscapes serving as symbols of ethical struggle, emotional reckoning, and existential inquiry. And in the quiet corridors of psychology, Carl Jung and other thinkers saw in these myths archetypal journeys of individuation, the descent into shadow, and the necessary confrontation with unconscious truths that shape human consciousness. Today, as we sit back and listen, tracing the contours of Styx, Lethe, Tartarus, and the Elysian fields, we are reminded that the Greek underworld was never static, never fully known, and never merely imaginary. It exists in our collective memory, in the stories we tell, in the ways we confront mortality and meaning. And as the mists of Hades swirl one last time before fading, we are left with a lingering question that has haunted humanity for millennia. In the vast silence beyond life, do we follow the currents of fate, or do we, in our own way, shape the journey that awaits? Sit back, relax, and let the surface world slowly fade, because the story you're about to hear does not begin in light, but in the quiet certainty that every ancient Greek lived with the knowledge that beneath their feet existed another realm, older than memory and deeper than fear. The Greek underworld was not a distant heaven or a fiery punishment reserved for the wicked. It was an unavoidable destination, a shadowed mirror of life itself, waiting patiently for kings and farmers, heroes and children alike. Long before, philosophers debated the soul and poets shaped epics. Early Greek communities buried their dead with offerings, tools, and tokens, whispering the same question into the soil. Where does the self go when the breath leaves the body? Over time, that question hardened into geography. The underworld became a place with rivers you could hear before you saw, gates that groaned like ancient wood under pressure, and laws more rigid than those of any city-state above. Some researchers believe this realm emerged from Bronze Age burial traditions, when tombs were imagined not as endings, but as doorways. Others suggest it formed as a psychological map, a way to give shape to grief, fear, and the unbearable finality of death. What is certain is that the underworld was never static. It evolved as Greek society evolved, absorbing new ideas, fears, and moral questions. In the earliest visions, the dead drifted as faint shades, barely aware, barely remembered, murmuring, like wind through dry grass. But even then, the Greeks sensed boundaries, lines that should not be crossed, rules that must be obeyed. Rivers like Styx and Acheron were imagined not just as water, but as thresholds, cold and echoing, separating the warmth of life from the stillness beyond. To cross them was to accept a transformation that could never be undone. This was not a place of fire and screams, but of distance, silence, and memory slowly eroding like stone under running water. Yet even in this muted darkness, questions stirred. Could virtue matter after death? Could injustice follow the soul? And if the underworld had rules, who enforced them and why? As the Greeks looked into the darkness beneath the world, they began to sense that this realm was not empty at all, but watching, waiting, and governed by forces older than the gods themselves. And if that is true, then who was the first power to claim dominion over death, and what did that rule truly mean? Before the underworld had judges, rivers, or gates, it began with a fracture. A moment when existence itself was divided into realms that would never again fully touch. In the aftermath of the Titanomachi, when the Olympian gods overthrew the Titans and reshaped the universe, the cosmos was parceled out by lot, not by desire, but by necessity. Some researchers believe this division reflects early Greek anxieties about balance and fairness, while others suggest it mirrors ancient practices of land division after war. Zeus claimed the sky, the domain of storms and authority. Poseidon received the sea, restless and untamable. And Hades, often misunderstood, was given the realm beneath the earth not as a punishment, but as a responsibility. The underworld was not a throne seized through ambition, but a burden accepted in silence. Unlike his brothers, Hades did not roam the world or interfere openly in human affairs. He ruled from a distance, unseen but absolute, embodying the Greek belief that death does not need spectacle to command respect. The name Hades itself became dangerous to speak aloud, as if naming the god might summon his attention. And so euphemisms like the Unseen One replaced his true title in daily speech. This reluctance reveals something deeper. The Greeks did not fear Hades as a tyrant, but as an inevitability. His realm expanded with every death, silent and unstoppable, a kingdom that never lost territory. Over time, The underworld took on structure, reflecting the Greek instinct to organize even the unknowable. Boundaries formed, not just physical, but moral, and with them came questions. If Hades ruled the dead, did he judge them as well? Or was his role purely custodial? Some traditions suggest he was an impartial warden, enforcing laws written into the fabric of existence itself. Others hint that judgment emerged later, shaped by evolving ideas about justice and personal responsibility. What remained constant was the sense that once a soul entered his domain, it belonged to the underworld more completely than it ever belonged to the living world above. The earth became a lid, sealing the dead away, while caves, chasms, and sinkholes were imagined as weak points where the boundary thinned. To the Greeks, these were not metaphors, but places of unease, where cold air rose from below and sounds seemed to come from nowhere. If the world could be divided so cleanly, then what else had been separated at the beginning of time, and what price did humanity pay for living forever between sky and stone?